What happens when a person's voice is ignored for so long that they begin to believe they don't deserve one at all? These are the questions at the heart of The Color Purple, Alice Walker's groundbreaking novel, a story that has continued to resonate with readers for more than 40 years since its publication. My name is Zach, and today my group and I will be exploring this powerful and enduring work. The novel follows Sally, a young black woman living in the American South during the early 20th century. Through a series of letters, readers witness her journey through oppression, isolation, and hardship. Without revealing major spoilers, Sally's story becomes one of resilience, self-discovery, and the search for dignity in a world determined to deny it. At its core, The Color Purple explores themes of oppression, identity, family, survival, and personal growth. It examines how systems of power can silence people, but it also shows the remarkable strength required to reclaim one's voice. Sally's story is deeply personal, yet it speaks to experiences shared by countless individuals throughout history. Stories matter because they preserve experiences. And what makes this novel so important today is not simply the story it tells, but the fact that it tells it at all. These stories, they preserve experiences that others might prefer to ignore. Throughout history, oppressed groups have often been denied the opportunity to tell their own stories. Women, people of color, LGBTQI+ individuals, immigrants, refugees, and religious minorities have frequently had their experiences dismissed, erased, or rewritten by those in power. When stories are not told, injustice becomes easier to overlook. When people cannot name their experiences, it becomes harder to challenge the systems that created them. But when stories are shared honestly and unapologetically, they force us to confront realities we might otherwise ignore. That is why The Color Purple still matters. Alice Walker does more than tell Sally's story. She demonstrates the power of storytelling itself. The novel reminds us that giving voice to the marginalized is not just an act of remembrance, it is an act of resistance. Because if we forget these stories, we risk allowing the same forms of oppression to continue. But when we listen, remember, and share them, we create the possibility for understanding, empathy, and change.
There's a line in The Color Purple that forces you to catch your breath. Chuck Avery turns to Celie and says, "I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and don't notice it." For generations, the world did something far worse than ignore a color. It walked right past the lives, the pain, the brilliant, resilient souls of black women living in the American South. It looked at them and chose not to notice. But Alice Walker refused to let the world look that way. To understand the raw, aching honesty of The Color Purple, you have to understand the woman who held the pen. Born in 1944 in Eatonton, Georgia, Alice Walker is the youngest of 8 children to sharecropper parents. She grew up in a world tightly bound by the Jim Crow segregation, a world where racism was structural, economic, and violent. But inside her own community, she also witnessed a quieter, intimate wounding. The weight of sexism, where women were often dynamic spirits trapped in patriarchal control. When Alice was just 8 years old, a BB gun accident left her blind in one eye. Scared and deeply self-conscious, she retreated into isolation. But in that silence, she did not disappear. She became an observer. She started really noticing the people around her, especially black women who worked in the fields, raised children, and kept the whole communities afloat, all while their own stories were systematically erased. As she grew, Walker poured her observation into action. She threw herself into the civil rights movement, marching for voting rights, teaching, and fighting on the front lines. But she noticed a glaring gap in the revolution. Even within movements for liberation, the specific intersecting struggles of black women were pushing the margins. So she coined a term, womanism. It wasn't just feminism with a different shape. It was a framework centered on the experiences, histories, and triumphs of women of color. The Color Purple was an ultimate act of womanist activism. Published in 1982, the novel was revolutionary. Walker gave the narrative voice entirely to Celie, a young, poorly educated black girl writing letters to God. Celie wasn't just a tragic backdrop, she was the main character. Walker wrote her ancestors, her neighbors, and her own heart into existence, forcing the literary world to sit with their trauma, their sexuality, and ultimately their profound capacity for joy and self love. The literary establishment was shaken. In 1983, Alice Walker became the first Black woman to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. That prize wasn't just a victory for a book, it was a historic validation. It signaled the world that a story about the poorest, most abused, most ignored demographic in America wasn't just a niche literature, it was a masterpiece of the human experience. Alice Walker looked at a field of people and a world had decided they were invisible, and she declared them beautiful, complex, and worthy. She teaches us that our greatest power isn't just in telling our own stories, but in fiercely, unapologetically giving a voice to those who have been forced into silence.
Now, before we can fully understand The Color Purple, we have to understand that the world our main character, Celie, was born into. A world shaped by poverty, segregation, and strict expectations for Black women. The Color Purple takes place in the early 1900s, when about 90% of African Americans lived in the rural South. Many Black families worked as sharecroppers or tenant farmers, farming land they did not own, and often remaining trapped in poverty. Because of this, many of the characters we see in this novel have very little economic power, and this makes it difficult for them to leave abusive situations or make independent choices. For example, Celie is financially dependent on the men in her life for much of the book. And at this time, Black women faced both racial and gender discrimination and had very limited job opportunities, often working as farm laborers or domestic servants. The women in the novel often experience oppression from both society and from the men in their communities, and this double burden is a central conflict in the book. Society expected Black women to be moral leaders who would help uplift families and communities despite them facing significant hardships. The expectation that Black women had to be obedient, self-sacrificing, and morally respectable influences how female characters in the book are treated. Celie is expected to endure mistreatment quietly, while women who challenge traditional roles, like Shug Avery, experience pushback from their community. At this time, Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation in schools, transportation, and other public spaces, and segregation was justified by the idea of separate but equal, while Black facilities were often much, much inferior. Limited educational opportunities help explain why Celie receives very little schooling. Her lack of education contributes to her feelings of powerlessness and limits her opportunities in her story. At the same time, the strong Black communities and activism of the era are reflected in the relationships between the women. Characters support one another, share knowledge, and help each other gain confidence and independence throughout the book.
Have you ever felt like your voice didn't matter? That's the reality Celie faces at the beginning of The Color Purple. She grows up in an environment where she is constantly silenced and made to feel powerless. Because she feels like no one will listen to her, she expresses her thoughts through letters instead of speaking openly. One of the most important parts of the novel is watching Celie transform from someone who is afraid to speak up into someone who becomes confident and independent in herself. Her journey isn't quick or easy, but it shows how powerful personal growth can be. A major reason for Celie's transformation is the relationship she forms with other women, specifically Shug, Avery, and Sophia. These women challenge the way Celie sees herself. They encourage her to recognize her value and remind her that she deserves respect and happiness. Through these friendships, Alice Walker highlights one of the novel's central themes: the importance of community and support. Sometimes it takes someone believing in us before we can believe in ourselves. The novel also explores themes of empowerment and independence. As Celie gains confidence, she begins making decisions for herself instead of allowing others to control her life. She learns that her voice matters and that she has power to shape her own future. In this way, her personal growth becomes an act of resistance against the people and systems trying to keep her silent. Readers continue to connect with Celi's story because her journey is universal. Many people have experienced moments of self-doubt or felt overlooked. Celi's transformation reminds us that no matter how difficult our circumstances may be, growth, healing, and self-discovery are possible. Her story shows that finding your own voice can be one of the most powerful forms of freedom.
Hi, my name is Annika, and I'm going to go into the impact and legacy the book The Color Purple has. When The Color Purple was published in 1982, it immediately sparked conversations that continue today. The novel became a major literary success, earning Alex Walker the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, making her the first Black woman to receive that award. This achievement helped bring greater attention to stories and perspectives that had often been overlooked in American literature. However, the book's impact had not been without controversy. Some readers have challenged or banned the novel because of its depictions of abuse, violence, sexuality, and difficult social issues. Others argue that these topics are exactly why the book's important. Walker does not include these experiences for shock value. She uses them to reveal the realities faced by many people and to highlight the strength required to overcome hardship. The influence of The Color Purple extends far beyond the pages of the novel. In 1985, it was adapted into a film directed by Steve Spielberg, introducing Cecily's story to a wider audience. It later became a successful Broadway musical and was adapted again into a musical film, proving that its themes continue to resonate across generations. Today, The Color Purple remains a powerful work because it encourages empathy and understanding. Through Cecily's journey, readers are reminded of the importance of resilience, self-worth, and finding one's voice. The novel challenges us to listen, to experience differences from our own, and to recognize the power that stories have to create change. More than 40 years after its publications, The Color Purple continues to inspire readers, spark discussion, and remind us that literature could do more than entertain. It can help us better understand each other and the world around us.